This episode features a brief segment discussing outdated and crude terminologies that were used historically to denote those with intellectual and neurological disabilities.
What is virtual reality? 1. A single-dimensional animation. 2. A three-dimensional interactive graphic world. 3. A new vehicle transmission system. 4. A type of lawnmower. To enter, just call 1-900-454-3344.
In 1978, Stephen King compiled a decade's worth of short stories and unreleased ideas and published them as the Night Shift Collection. Of this menagerie of odds and ends, 11 have been adapted and commercially released on both the big and small screen. As part of King's Dollar Baby initiative, where would-be creatives can take a crack at one of his short stories for the princely sum of one Mustang Sally, a 22-year-old Michael DeLuca, long before producing Moneyball and The Social Network, threw himself into adapting one of Night Shift's more hypnagogic efforts, The Lawnmower Man. A student film stuck together with spit and adorably embarrassing naivety, it's a 12-minute verbatim retelling of the original text. An Archie Bunker type hires a mowing service from the local paper, only to be met by a portly, mumbling figure who proceeds to gorge on lawn trimmings as his mower seemingly moves of its own volition. Obviously freaked out by this, the customer tries to contact the authorities before he is felled by this telekinetically controlled machine. King's original story isn't particularly good, and the short film is worse, but both are deeply memorable. What with their awkward imagery, obtuse references to semi-obscure Greek gods, and whole hog surrealism juxtaposed with King's typical tableau of picket fence Americana.
Stand straight.
Now, when you clicked on this Lawnmower Man video, you probably weren't thinking about whatever's going on here. Odds are you expected a heaping dose of this.
Flying.
Well, that's because what you and I most commonly associate with these three words has nothing to do with the source material.
To build a feature film around this short story is a tall order.
Initially, they wanted to be about a serial killer that ground women up for fertilizer. This was not the kind of film I wanted to make.
You see, the studio owned the rights to the name, bolted it onto a completely unrelated screenplay called Cyber God, and slapped the master of cocaine and car accidents John Hancock on it to try and capitalise on his credentials.
Bastards.
King wasn't one bit amused by this old switcheroo, so he sued New Line Cinema for taking the absolute piss and was awarded $2.5 million for the inconvenience. Then, when they kept milking his moniker for the home video release, he took them to court again, and won even more walking around money.
And I want to cash my checks now because I want to buy some new clothes, and I'm going to buy some cowboy boots, and I'm going to make this place a ranch.
Looking back over 3 decades later, The Lawnmower Man may not be a Kingsian project by any stretch, but that isn't to say it doesn't have worth, or that it doesn't draw on titans of literature to paint between the zeros and ones of its virtual world.
Game over.
Yes, you nailed it, Joe. You nailed it.
Whoa, that was sketch.
Dismayed by corporate interference into his attempts to combine smart drugs and virtual reality research, Dr. Lawrence Angelo enlists an intellectually disabled groundskeeper named Job to assist in his experiments. As Job's intelligence grows exponentially, he begins to access hitherto undiscovered areas of the mind. But soon, his supernatural genius is warped into a megalomaniacal belief that he is the next step in human evolution, and that flesh and blood are barriers to be destroyed. In the last few decades of the 20th century, cyberpunk speculation and techno-parables sought to cut to the core of Moore's Law trepidation. Upon modern reappraisals of these dystopian hypotheticals, panicked polemics, and cautionary tales about surrendering the warmth of our analogue past to a cold digital future, they run the gamut from timeless anxiety to quaint antiquation.
So close I can almost taste it.
For every snow crash which invented the metaverse 30 years before Mark Zuckerberg co-opted it, there's Johnny Mnemonic downloading more RAM and having a chinwag with a Borg dolphin. As Gattaca's exploration of genetic commodification proves ever more accurate, we are still a far cry from a swear jar judicial system where the potty has been replaced by 3 seashells.
He doesn't know how to use the 3 seashells.
The Lawnmower Man lands somewhere in the middle on this spectrum of foolhardy guesstimations and legitimate prescience. There are plenty of boilerplate themes and narrative conventions at play that fit snugly but generically into the cubbyhole of sci-fi storytelling. A piercing look into the risks of transhumanism, the dovetailing of militaristic interests with big tech hubris, as demonstrated by the Big Brother-esque looming bonds of Dean Norris, a rebuke to the fallacy that capitalism breeds unification rather than serving to silo off innovation and sell it back at a price that only serves to widen the chasm of economic and social division.
Well, I hate to be the one to break it to you, Larry, but the concept of dirty money went out when the Catholic Church got into banking about 300 years ago. It's old dirty money.
All of these are present, accounted for, and worthy of rumination. But they're nothing that hasn't been posited over and again since Asimov, Bradbury, and Clarke started toying with tech fear, or Le Guin first noted that truth is a matter of the imagination. Where the Lawnmower Man truly excels is in its depiction of electronic spaces, and how their illuminating and educational power can be manipulated until they fracture the impressionable minds of those who aren't prepared to be inundated with unfiltered, unvetted, and agenda-distorted information. An opening text card that misspells the word millennium calls for a fresh moral panic about the dissociative perils of virtual reality, which seems mighty daft when taken at face value by anyone with buyer's remorse over their Oculus Rift. But when weighing this sentiment against the democracy-destabilizing toxic hell of online cul-de-sacs, it doesn't seem so out of touch with where we've wound up.
Insights seem twisted. I fear for Job's sanity.
Let me just lay out Job's journey from front to back. At first, he's a sheltered and naive individual trying to simply exist, as he's pelted with the slings and arrows of bullies and abusers in his day-to-day life. He then finds purpose and community in an online environment, where he's free to learn, create, and express himself without brick-and-mortar constraints. Then, as a direct result of the lack of content moderation and the profiteering psychopathy of those pushing an adversarial mindset into these spaces, Job is violently radicalized against past bullies and those he blames for holding him back from his true potential.
Lawnmower Man's in your head now, Jake. There's no escape, ever.
In the end, he's about one Pepe the Frog avatar and an 8-kun manifesto away from our current state of damage-inflicting discourse. What this does such a good job of conveying is how virtual environments have encouraged Job to become a sponge of information, but not consideration.
There's a lot to be said for slower absorption.
Like what?
Like reading a good book. Taking time to grapple with the thoughts and concepts you're exposed to. It's not like memorization, Joe.
The joy of feeling is overwritten by faulty objectivism, to the point where he sees even the base pleasures of art and sex as something to be stress-tested and perfected. Note this quietly sad scene where Job misses the point of listening to music.
Classical. You should try listening to a whole tune once. You might like it.
Ah, too much to hear. I get it all by sampling segments anyway.
Strip away Jeff Fahey's simple Jack shtick and Pierce Brosnan's stubble rubbing, and this is all about delusions of grandeur, misplaced rage, and corrosive ideologies, and how they're unlocked and commodified by the internet.
My mind is blazing. It's filling with information. What I've learned in virtual reality makes books obsolete.
This is mirrored by Job's relationship with religion, where words and images intended for enlightenment are rendered down to lashings of bile and judgment, until the Key of Solomon and Kabbalistic symbols become interspersed with the mind-altering bombardment of knowledge. Divorced from their intended meaning and presented without curation, these doctrines and sacred runes take on a menace that only adds to the confusion and perversion of these otherwise benign documents. So yeah, there's far more here than that weird scene where Job turns a bunch of goons into vibrating balls. The director's cut of The Lawnmower Man, which you should all seek out as it's a vastly superior work that renders the original release utterly redundant, takes great pains to warn of the dangers of an ever-evolving and increasingly unfiltered World Wide Web, where reality and post-truth callousness can twist the most decent of men into monsters.
Even with all these new abilities, there are dangers. Man may be able to evolve 1,000-fold through this technology, but the rush must be tempered with wisdom.
It does this whilst also interrogating an oversimplification that's found in most man versus machine fiction. Rather than the rote belief that technology inevitably corrupts the majesty of Mother Nature, The Lawnmower Man emphasises that the real problem is the introjection of imperfect and impure human machinations into a system that is going to do exactly what it's told.
Just as the telegraph grew to the telephone, as the radio to the TV, it will be everywhere.
It's essentially saying, if you use a teapot as a urinal, don't act surprised when your Earl Grey tastes like toilet.
There's a great myth in the man-machine interface taking over culture. Which side's going to win? What is going to be the spirit in the machine?
As a narrative feature, the only holdover this has from Stephen King's short story of the same name is the threshing murder of a layabout lout and the final resting place of his disemboweled offal.
Where's the rest of him?
Bird bath.
Where's the rest of them?
Bird bath. Did you say the bird bath? Bird bath.
However, we're still looking at a literary adaptation here, albeit an uncredited one.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon charts the travails of Charlie Gordon, an intellectually disabled 30-something who undergoes a procedure to rapidly and drastically increase his intelligence.
My eyes are new, Doctor.
And what do they see, Mr. Gordon?
Things as they are, and what they are becoming.
Modern science.
Rampant technology. Conscience by computer.
The coming generation.
Test tube conception, laboratory birth, TV education, brave new dreams, brave new hates, brave new wars, a beautifully purposeless process of society suicide.
Published in 1966 to critical acclaim, commercial success, and a heap of Ted Cruz types pulling it from schools and libraries because it posits the radical notion that marginalised folks are people and sex is a thing that happens, Flowers for Algernon broaches neurodevelopmental divergence, cognitive impairment, and adaptive limitations with a soulful understanding that far exceeded the popular educational consensus of the era. While not even on the same planet as far as skillful prose and tear-jerking beauty are concerned, The Lawnmower Man is effectively a cyber-dork interpolation of the exact same premise. Only this opens with a monkey getting roid rage and becoming an active shooter at a research facility that kinda looks like a laser tag arena. The overlapping similarities between the two texts and their approach to the concept of uplift, where an individual is augmented to exceed their intellectual limitations by a more advanced party, are uncanny and unmistakable. Both protagonists are physically abused for not meeting the neurotypical expectations of their guardians, and each shares a love of comic books despite being illiterate. Their mental progress is measured against that of an animal who has undergone the same procedure, and after forming a kinship with this miraculous mammal, their new friend dies in a manner that echoes their ultimate fate. Each has a kinship with a figure of unpretentious kindness who cares for and champions the protagonist regardless of their IQ, and the kickstarting of their arrested neurological development coincides with the adult onset of puberty and sexual awareness. Thematically, each speaks to the ethics of obtaining informed consent when dealing with those who cannot comprehend the ramifications of what they're undertaking, the integral difference between emotional and academic intelligence, and how acts of exploitation are often conducted under the guise of altruism. In many ways, most notably Job's sexual awakening, bubbling nihilism, and bitter alienation that swells alongside his prefrontal cortex, The Lawnmower Man is spiritually much closer to Flowers for Algernon than either of the extremely corny, not even slightly horny official adaptations of the novel, albeit with much less tragedy of the human condition and way more of this. Despite all these virtues and thoughtful markers being present and not even remotely obfuscated, why is the finished product so widely remembered as a so bad it's good favourite, or an irony-pilled punchline? The soundtrack isn't great, the cinematography is unremarkable, and some of the performances are more stilted than a stilt. But typically, there are two main critiques used to weigh down and drown any good faith analysis or after-the-fact appraisals of what we're working with here. First, the aged VFX. Second, its portrayal of intellectual, cognitive, and developmental disability.
You know, Cybo Man, if you want, you could call me Lawnmower Man. Everybody does.
Let's start with the more cut-and-dry CinemaSins dings against the VFX sequences, given how you can't throw a stone without hitting some nostalgia critic contemporaneously deriding them as unreal, ugly, and awful. Well, okay. Are these vignettes photoreal or comparable with modern graphical horsepower? No, most of it kinda looks like a SNES cartridge of Star Fox put a gun in its mouth. Okay, so were they ever once meant to look realistic? No, absolutely not.
And of course it fit the design and the subject matter of the film being about simulated realities, and a sort of a nascent medium that was creating simulated realities that were abstract in nature.
These are depictions of nootropic edutainment intended for cognitive enhancement and synaptic engagement, acting as seductive, inorganic aberrations of all Job has ever known. The rustic homesteads, the fresh-cut greenery, and the soft-focused scenery of simple rural living are swallowed up and supplanted by this undulated terrain and saw-toothed sine waves. What we're looking at is the expressive latitudes of Job's humanity brutally compressed into keyframes and fractals.
There hasn't been a lot of effects that are in that style, what I would call cyberdelia, which is utilizing computer graphic effects in a way that is abstract.
What we see here is distinct, the most aesthetically adventurous depiction of a virtual realm at the time since Tron, and a CG reel whose influence and innovation would inform and inspire many that followed. It's a shame then that no such superlatives can be said of the Lawnmower Man's attempts to empathetically and accurately convey Job's disability.
One of the things that I was fascinated about the story was the idea of being able to play this character from almost this child stage.
Jeff Fahey's pre-treatment take on Job is a minstrel show of stereotypes and pantomiming discomfort, so broad and lacking specific parity with any actual condition that it's indistinguishable from mockery.
Hey, Jake, that's dangerous.
You forget who you're talking to, half-wit?
That's dangerous.
All references to his developmental state are casually reduced to this word.
Freaking retard.
I'm not here to hop on the euphemism treadmill and reflexively eviscerate a B-movie from 1992 for using a term that, at the time, was standardized medical jargon, and which wouldn't be phased out on a federal level until 2010. What does leave a sour taste is that it isn't being used in a manner that would even fit the antiquated diagnostic parameters of the period.
Why did Roscoe bond with this retarded man?
Characters use that word as a pejorative shorthand rather than offering any insight into what developmental, intellectual, and/or learning conditions Job actually has.
He is little more than a 6-year-old's mentality, for Christ's sake.
If you're trying to illustrate Dr. Angelo as a pioneer in the fields of neurobiology and cognitive functionality, having him refer to a diagnostically complex patient so reductively
Retardation
is no less short-sighted and baffling than calling every liquid on Earth water. Or if you were to watch Contagion and every epidemiologist refer to the meningoencephalitis virus as big diarrhea.
What are you talking about?
There's also a patently gross belief alluded to here that neurodivergence is something to be isolated and snuffed out. That Job is a glitch that needs to be patched rather than an individual worthy of conscientious understanding and care.
It only makes sense. This is the technology that transformed me.
It all starts to take on a borderline eugenic attitude that is neither challenged nor addressed at any point.
I was born dumb.
But you would like to be smarter, wouldn't you?
With a more concerted effort to methodically and humanistically speak for those so often consigned to silence, this could have been a more widely recognised piece of prescience and profundity dolled up in all its gaudy glory. Instead, it's a rough and scuffed gem that's worthy of reappraisal, but stuck in a limbo of its own making.
Access denied. Access denied.
I was planning on rounding out this video with a dive into 1996's The Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace, but life is too short to waste any of our time on that defenestrated bag of shattered bollocks. So here's the shorthand bullet point version of a script I didn't dare to finish.
Woo! This is true spirituality.
Despite opening with a flashback to the events of the previous movie, which ended with Job leaving his immortal husk behind and uploading his consciousness to the internet before his raisin bran remains were well and truly atomized in a C4 explosion, the scene that immediately follows this previously on segment just says, oh well, I know we just confirmed all that happened, and we showed you footage of it happening, but here comes a gigantic retcon because no it didn't. Job's alive, he didn't upload himself to the internet. I mean, yeah, you definitely saw that in the first movie, and we just showed it again, but, I've never seen anything like this. Why bother recapping an event only to immediately undo it in an act of editorial gaslighting? Who the hell knows? From what you can see here, Job has been recast with Matt Frewer of Max Headroom fame taking over from Jeff Fahey, even though the two look and sound about as similar as CCH Pounder and Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
It is everything in me not to slap you silly.
The villain this time around is basically Comcast, an internet service provider who wants to digitally connect people for a price whilst he harvests data and sells it to advertisers. I mean, sure, Visually, it's a hideous orange juice and milk mashup of 1993's Super Mario Bros. And the Lost Boys segments of Hook, although it's nowhere near as rad as that actually sounds.
You won't jack in.
Jack in, jack off, what's the difference?
Yeah, I really can't talk about this anymore. It's really bad. It's not underrated, it's not misunderstood. It's just unsalvageable rubbish where the only thing it has going for it is this shot of a dog who can operate a computer more proficiently than either of my parents. If you really want a spiritual successor to the original, why not try director Brett Leonard's follow-up feature, Virtuosity? It's got all the good stuff. VR headsets, nanotech, Russell Crowe plays a criminally insane simulation built from the AI constructs of hundreds of serial killers who escapes into the real world by downloading himself into an android body. And so a one-armed Denzel Washington is sent to track him down as he goes on a murder spree through cyberpunk Los Angeles.
Folks at home? Ed, folks at home. Enjoying the show, Ed?
Virtuosity. It's great, it's rubbish, it's brilliant, and I mean, how can you not like a film that has this in it?
1, 2, 3! Shut up!
With everything said and done, I'm very glad the Lawnmower Man exists and continues to garner more considered reappraisals of what works whilst promoting difficult discussions about what really doesn't.
I saw God! I touched God!
I can't honestly call it a great film, but it harbours so many great ideas. It wasn't omniscient, but it did have an inkling of which way the wind was blowing and sensed the storm of transcendence and online radicalization on the horizon. So track down the director's cut, gas up your grass slasher, and sink into a virtual world quite unlike anything else.
A computer voiced shout out to our Patreon producers Jennifer C, Claire MD, Becky O, Kay Kraus, Jennifer Fedish, Reed Stuven, CC Sings and Nicholas Laravere. And a death rattle from the digital void for all these amazing folks who support us over on Patreon. So what do you think of The Lawnmower Man? Have you seen the terrible sequel? And what movie do you think best captures the essence of the internet? Sound off in the comments and consider donating as little as $1 a month over at the Patreon link in the description below. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, this is In Frame out.